Hi everyone. In this video we are going to discuss how to use for loops in Python to print some patterns. Patterns are the repeated printing of characters, and normally if you see that you can see a pyramid in that. So you see there's a pattern in this. 1 2 2 3 3 3 4 4 4 4 5 5 5 5 5. So how to print these patterns? Usually, if you want to print the patterns, you want to go to nested for loops. So what is a nested for loop? We know for loops, and if you have one for loop within another for loop, then that is called nested for loop. So here the number of levels of nesting can be infinity. That means it can be up to any level. Okay, one for loop within another for loop, that is within another for loop, that is within another for loop. So you can go up to any level. So here to print the patterns, usually we will stop with maximum two levels of nesting. That means one for loop within another for loop, right? So now let us discuss how to print this pattern. If you are seeing the pattern, you can see the first number is 1 and last number is 5. This is one thing. And second thing, how many number of rows are there in this pattern? There are 5 rows in this pattern, so it's fixed. This pattern is not going to grow depending upon the user's input. So here a pattern is given as input, and you have to write the program to print this pattern. So this pattern is having exactly 5 rows in it. So we know that there are 5 rows, and we can use that information to create the for loop. Now let us go to the for loop. Let us write the for loop, and the outer for loop is going to denote the number of rows in the pattern, right? So here there are five rows in this pattern, so the outer for loop should execute 5 times. The outer for loop should execute 5 times. So let us write the outer for loop first. For, let us take the iterating variables name I, then in, and since it has to execute 5 times, we have to generate a range of numbers from 1 till 5. But if you want to have 5 as the last number in that sequence of numbers generated by range, then you have to provide 6 as the end value, right? So we know that range function is working in that nature, right? So refer the video on range function on Python in our channel, and get the idea on how the range function is working. Now here the range functions are working in a manner that when you are providing the two values, first value is considered as the start of that particular range of numbers going to be generated, and the next number is going to denote the end number that is going to be generated in that range. But the end number is not included in the range of numbers generated. So if you want to have from 1 to 5, then you have to have 6, because 5 is not included in the range. So you have to have up to 6, so that 5 will also be there, right? So now this for loop is written. So this for loop denotes how many rows are there. This for loop is denoting how many rows are there. There are 5 rows, so this for loop will execute 5 times. Now if you see the pattern clearly, you can understand one thing. For example, if you are saying that the outer for loop is executing 5 times, and every time this outer for loop's iterating variable I will have the values from 1, then 2, then 3, then 4, then 5. You see the first row contains 1 one time, then second row contains 2 two times, and third row contains 3 three times, fourth row contains 4 four times, and fifth row contains 5 5 times. So if you take this value from the iterating variable of outer for loop, for example I in our program, right? When I use 1, right, it is printing I one time. When I use 2, it is printing I. So when I use 2, it is printing I two times. When I use 3, it is printing I three times. When I use 4, it is printing I four times. When I use 5, it is printing I five times. So what is happening? In every row, right? This I is printed I times. When I use 1, it is printed one time. When I use 2, I is printed two times. When I use 3, it is printed three times, right? So when I is they having a value, right? It is printed I times in every row, right? So let us write the inner for loop. So inner for loop is actually deciding the number to be printed and how many number of times it is to be printed. So both will be decided by the inner for loop. But here that is based on the value of I, because value of I is only printed, but how many number of times? I times. Okay. So now we can write the inner for loop for, let us take the iterating variable j for inner for loop in, right? Now you see the inner for loop is executing how many number of times? When I is 1, when I is 1 it is executing 1 time, when I is 2 it is executing 2 times, when I is 3 it is executing 3 times. So it is executing I times. So for every iteration of outer for loop, the inner for loop has to execute I times to print the values in the row. Outer for loop denotes the row and inner for loop denotes the values in the row. So the inner for loop has to execute I times, right? So for j in, actually you have to generate a set of values within the range from 1 till I. But again, there's a problem. I is not inclusive in the range of numbers. If you want to have I in that range, for example, if you want to print 2 times, when I is 2, it has to print 2 times. Okay. In that case, it has to start from 1 and it has to go till 2. But if you are providing 2 here, it will go till 1 only, right? So what you do is you provide I plus 1. You provide I plus 1. So now you see outer for loop is executing 5 times corresponding to 5 rows, and inner for loop is executing I times corresponding to, then I, actually the I is printed I times in every row. That in that manner we are deciding the inner for loop. Now you see print value of I, because every time I is printed. Okay, when I is 1, when I is 1, 1 is printed. When I is 2, 2 is printed. When I is 3, 3 is printed. When I is 4, 4 is printed. When I is 5, 5 is printed, right? So you print I. Okay, every time you print I. Print I. Okay, so once you print I, right, it's that's all. Actually the pattern printing is over, but whether it will be in the proper pattern, in the proper permit pattern, so that is very very important. But before that, okay, now let us run the program first and let us check how this output is looking like. So pattern dot pattern1 dot py, for example. Now you see it is printing 1 1 time, 2 2 times, 3 3 times, 4 4 times, and 5 5 times. It is printing the values properly, but it is not in the pattern of pyramid, or it is not in the proper expected pattern, expected shape, right? Actually, what is that expected shape? One should be I should be printed I times in the first row. After that, the next row should be printed right in the next line, right? Next row should be, every row should be printed in new lines. Okay, but in our output actually it is not printing in the new line. Every value is printing in new line. Okay, every value is printing in new line. That means once the first row is over, once the first row is over, at that time we have to go for next line or new line. So what can we do is actually, uh, in the program, what you can do is you can use a concept called leaving a space after printing the current value. Usually what print will do is it will print the current character or current string in this output screen, and it will move the cursor to the next line. That is what the nature of print statement. But here, after printing every value, we should not go to the next line, because for after completing one row it has to move to the next line. So to make that possible, what we are doing is we are using an end character or end operator, and this end operator is deciding, right, when is to be moved to the next line, or actually there should be a space after the current value. After printing the current value, there should be a space. So that is what decided by this end. So end is equal to, then within set of double quotes give a white space. So what will happen, instead of printing the particular character or value and moving to the next line, after printing that character it will keep the cursor one white space after the current position. So that is what it will do. Now let us check. Now let us check. So run module again to see. Now everything is in the same row. Actually, it is printing in not in is in individual lines. It is printing in the same line. But what we want is we want first row in the first line, second row in the second line, third row in the third line, fourth row in the fourth line, and fifth row in the fifth line. So in that case, what we want to do is after printing a particular row, the inner for loop is printing the elements in a particular row, right? After printing the elements in a particular row, move to the next line. So how to move to the next line? Print is having the capability of moving the cursor to the next line. So after printing the current set of elements in that particular row, that means after the execution of all the iterations of the inner for loop, before moving to the next iteration of the outer for loop, just give an new line. That means move the cursor to the new line. So how can you move the cursor to new line? Is actually by using print statement empty. It's a blank print statement. So this blank print statement will move the cursor. It will not print anything, but at the same time it will move the cursor to the next line. Now let us check it. Run module to see. Now this is the expected pattern in our screen, right? 1 in first line, then 2 2 in next line, 3 3 3 in the third line, then 4 4 4 in fourth line, 5 5 5 5 5 in fifth line. Now this is working properly to get the pattern. For example, I want to have in different form another the same pattern in different form. For example, 1 1 2, then 1 2 3, then 1 2 3 4, then 1 2 3 4 5, right? So is it actually it's looking like a different pattern, right? But there is no much difference required in our original program to attain this pattern. You see, you look at this set of no instructions given. You see, when I use one, when I use one, J starts from one and it is going till I, right? It's going till I. So initially when I use one, it is going till I means it's going till one. When I use two, J starting from one and is going till two. When I use 3, j is starting from 1 and it is going to 3. You see, then in this case, if you are having a value of 5, okay, in outer for loop, the inner for loop is taking the values of j, right? That j is actually in this pattern, right? 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That means j is taking the values, actually values from 1 till I. That means it's changing from 1, then it's going to 2, then 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So if you want to have this pattern on your screen, instead of printing I, you print J. That's all. Because in every iteration, the inner for loop J actually it is taking values from 1 till I. So initially it will take from 1 to 1, then 1 to 2, then 1 to 3, then 1 to 4, then 1 to 4, 5, right? So every time it will print the values from 1 to I, right? So instead of printing I, if you print J, then let us see the result. Run module. You see, you are seeing the other pattern, right? 1 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 5, right? So I hope that you understood how the patterns are working, but this is not the end of having discussions on patterns. We will have a lot of other videos on patterns, and we will discuss the very other programs how to display various patterns in our programs, right? Or using Python, using for nested for loops, right? So keep on watching videos in Program for Programmers by Felix, and subscribe the channel if you are not subscribed so far, and press the bell button to get the new uploads. Happy programming. Thank you.